Great. Good evening. My name is Will Fisher. I am with the New York City Economic Development Corporation. We are working in partnership with a number of folks, including all of you here tonight, the elected officials, the Community Board 3, and then you can see here at the bottom of the screen our agency partners, as well as AECOM. So thanks to the Mayor's Office of Resiliency as well, Department of Design and Construction, New York City Parks, and New York City Transportation. So we're really excited to have you all here tonight. It's great to see more than 100 people at the meeting. I'm going to go over some logistics first, and then I will give you a little bit of information regarding the project before we go into the full presentation. So we're going to go generally through a pre-recorded video presentation. Some of you who have been to our meetings in the past may recognize Lauren Messier's voice. She's with us here tonight, but we'll go through the video presentation first, which again will be interpreted. And then following that presentation is about 20 or 25 minutes. Following that, we will go to question and answer. And then we can always refer back to the slides afterwards if needed. So generally regarding the project, in case anyone is not familiar with the project, and this is your first time, we're really excited to be working with folks in the Two Bridges neighborhood to design the Brooklyn Bridge-Montgomery Coastal Resilience Project, which was formerly known as the Two Bridges Coastal Resilience Project. So this is a project spanning the Two Bridges area from the Brooklyn Bridge north to Montgomery Street. It's about just shy of a mile of shoreline that we are working to construct a project that significantly reduces the risk of damage to the neighborhood like we saw during Hurricane Sandy from both long-term sea level rise as well as storm surge. Again, we're working with a lot of agency partners and a lot of partners in the community to make this happen. We have been doing outreach in the community in a variety of forms for about 4 years now. So right now we are about 3/4 done with design. And we are looking to complete design in early 2021, early next year. So we're continuing to work through the sort of final stages of design, but we're really looking forward to this evening presenting you with sort of what we've come up with in partnership with you all and your feedback, as well as with our partner agencies. And what we've come up with is essentially a flood protection program that will, again, protect both against long-term nuisance sea level rise, as well as storm surge like Hurricane Sandy. So with that, I just want to thank everybody again for being here. We are looking to go to about 8 p.m. tonight. We can maybe go a little bit over, but I do want to just let everyone know that if your question is not answered during our live Q&A session, please do include it in the chat so that we can answer it. We're going to be assembling, in addition to the recordings from this webinar, we are going to be assembling a question and answer sheet that's going to go up online along with that. I hope everybody here was able to see the flyers and the banners that we have out in the community. I do want to give a shout out and thank our colleagues at CARP, our consultant on the engagement front, who have really been out doing a lot of flyering, putting up a lot of posters. And I hope that folks were able to see the presence of this team in the community. And with that, I just want to thank you again for joining. And with that, we will move on to the presentation section.
Welcome to the public webinar for the Brooklyn Bridge-Montgomery Coastal Resilience Project. This presentation will include a review of the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, an introduction to the Brooklyn Bridge-Montgomery Coastal Resilience Project, a description of the flood protection system and raised platform, a walkthrough of the project design, and an overview of the Interceptor gate building.
防洪閘放起啦，即係唔同嘅一啲關於呢個工程裏邊嘅方面，我哋今晚都會喺度同大家介紹嘅。
interpreters, I just reset the main channel, so please head back to your channels. Thank you.
Brooklyn Bridge-Montgomery Coastal Resilience Project. This presentation will include a review of the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, an introduction to the Brooklyn Bridge-Montgomery Coastal Resilience Project, a description of the flood protection system and raised platform, a walkthrough of the project design, and an overview of the Interceptor gate building. In October 2012, Hurricane Sandy hit New York City, causing widespread flooding, damaging thousands of homes, and interrupting a critical transportation hub. Climate change is increasing the future risk of flooding due to sea level rise and coastal storms. Coastal storms are extreme, isolated events like Hurricane Sandy that bring severe flooding. Sea level rise increases the frequency of tidal flooding that happens even on sunny days. Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency, or LMCR, is the city's plan to protect Lower Manhattan from the effects of climate change for this generation and the next. Through LMCR, the city identified permanent adaptation projects and developed an overall strategy for the climate resilience of Lower Manhattan. The city is taking bold, significant action, investing $500 million in resilience projects that will be in construction by 2021. These projects will cover 70% of Lower Manhattan's coastline. In Battery Park City, the Battery Park City Authority is advancing designs for 3 integrated coastal resilience projects. In the Battery, the city is rebuilding and elevating the waterfront esplanade to adapt the park to future sea level rise. In the Financial District and Seaport, where the waterfront is uniquely challenging and complex, the city is developing a shoreline extension plan to adapt these 2 neighborhoods. The city has also implemented interim flood protection measures in 2 bridges, the Seaport, and the Financial District. These are temporary measures meant to protect against more frequent, less severe storms before a capital project is implemented. And finally, the focus of this presentation, the Brooklyn Bridge-Montgomery Coastal Resilience Project, or BMCR for short. BMCR will reduce flood risk in the 2 Bridges neighborhood while maintaining the community's views and access to the waterfront. In 2 Bridges, flooding from Hurricane Sandy damaged buildings and infrastructure, disrupted mobility and access, and demonstrated the neighborhood's vulnerability to climate change. In the future, impacts from coastal storms will be even more severe. This map shows the potential flooding that could result from a 100-year storm surge in the 2050s. A 100-year storm has a 1% chance of occurring every year. Flooding may extend up to 3 blocks inland, and most of the buildings within the floodplain are residential. People and homes will be at risk. For more than 4 years, the BMCR project team has been meeting with the community to get input and feedback on the design. In addition to top priorities of reducing flood risk and preserving views and access, we heard how this community uses the waterfront today and what types of amenities should be kept or added to the waterfront. This presentation will show how community feedback was incorporated into the design. For example, we heard the desire for flexible use spaces, universal fitness equipment, playgrounds and gliders, and have worked to incorporate these features into the design. We've come a long way since 2016, and the design is now more than 75% complete. That means the design components are set, including the flood protection system and public amenities. Through the final design process, we'll be adding details for construction. Final design is scheduled to complete next summer, 2021, and construction will start at the end of 2021. We will hold one more public meeting in the spring to share next steps. Once design is complete, the New York City Economic Development Corporation will hand off the project to the Department of Design and Construction. The DDC will continue to engage the community while construction is ongoing. The BMCR project area overlaps with the existing East River Esplanade and will impact some of the existing amenities. Based on community feedback and feasibility, some of those features will be replaced or relocated as part of this project. We have also coordinated the BMCR and Brooklyn Bridge Esplanade designs to minimize overlap between the two projects. The waterfront today is an active public space shared by the whole neighborhood. The Esplanade features fishing and seating along the waterfront, open flexible spaces and bike facilities, and recreation facilities like basketball courts and fitness equipment. Two Bridges also has spectacular, iconic views of the East River and the Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges. However, the waterfront is already constrained by the overhead FDR, and we understand it's critical to preserve the existing views and access to the waterfront as much as possible. In order to make sure the community can continue to enjoy the waterfront in the future, the design uses a combination of deployable floodgates as well as fixed flood walls. These gates provide resilience while preserving views and access to the waterfront. When they're not in use for a storm event, flip-up gates are stored hidden in the ground. Roller and swing gates provide openings between fixed structures. These gates are visible above ground. They are stored upright against fixed flood walls. All of the gates will be closed and secured before a major storm event. Along the waterfront esplanade, the flood protection will primarily consist of flip-up gates. Flip-up gates are powered by hydraulic power units, or HPUs, which are housed in columns between the gates. Due to engineering and space constraints, flood walls, in combination with roller and swing gates, are used in a few locations along the esplanade, also in front of Pier 36, and where the flood protection ties inland at the Brooklyn Bridge and Montgomery Street. The Two Bridges neighborhood will be at risk of frequent tidal flooding, even on sunny days, by the 2050s. Sea level rise, combined with high tides and small storms, will raise the water level above the edge of the shoreline. Tidal flooding will be less severe than major storm surges, but will likely occur more frequently. We've heard from many community members that this is a big concern. People have seen the water coming up closer to the edge of the esplanade and have already experienced days when there's water on the esplanade. We have a real opportunity with this project to respond to multiple kinds of flood hazards, to raise low areas of the waterfront and address not only future coastal storms, but also sea level rise. To reduce the risk of tidal flooding, the flood infrastructure will be built on top of a raised platform, up to 2.5 feet high. The flood infrastructure on top of the platform will be deployed during major storm events to reduce flood risk from coastal storms. The platform will be raised in the middle of the esplanade and will incorporate both steps and ramps for universal accessibility. Program amenities will be included on top of and around the platform. The design of the flood infrastructure and public realm responds to a number of site constraints above and below ground, including required clearances around the FDR columns, foundations, and overhead structure, underground utilities and major sewer infrastructure, access along the waterfront for maintenance and emergency vehicles, and vehicular access on the upland side of the flood protection for floodgate deployment operations. The design features a variety of opportunities along the waterfront, including places to socialize, to sit and relax, to move, and to play. Social gathering spaces, shown in pink, are located at street intersections, where people arrive at the waterfront from the neighborhood. Spaces to move and play, shown in orange, are located across from residential buildings at the north and south ends of the site. In between, shown in blue, gliders and benches provide quiet spaces to sit and relax. Starting at the Brooklyn Bridge, let's take a closer look at each of these spaces. This area is located just north of the Brooklyn Bridge, across from Robert Wagner Place and the NYCHA Smith houses. The dark gray striped band in the center of the esplanade is the flood infrastructure. Metal-clad flip-up gates on top of the raised platform. In between the gates, concrete columns house the hydraulic power units that operate the gates. Ramps and steps provide access on both sides of the platform. The green box in the lower left corner is a small storage unit that NYC Parks will use to store maintenance equipment. Public amenities include gathering areas with benches, chaise lounges, and game tables, a picnic area, a basketball court, a small community performance space, and glider swings. This is a view standing on top of the flip-up gates looking north. The basketball court and picnic area are on the left. Here, looking out towards the East River, the Brooklyn skyline with the Manhattan and Brooklyn bridges provide an impressive backdrop for the community performance space. Just south of Catherine Slip, across from the Smith houses, the flip-up gates are located underneath the bike lane because of engineering constraints on the esplanade. The raised platform widens to make space for a playground and fitness area. The playground includes an accessible ramped play space for the 5 to 12 age range and a sensory playscape for 2 to 5-year-olds. The playground also includes plenty of benches for parents and guardians to relax while their kids run and play. At Catherine Slip, a ramp located between the crosswalks provides access to the flexible use space and seating on top of the platform. Clusters of benches, chaise lounges, and game tables offer space for people to hang out and socialize. During a storm event, the flip-up gates stored inside the platform will be raised into their vertical position to keep the water out. The furnishings and other amenities are designed with durable, resilient materials. However, in the event of a major coastal storm, some damage is inevitable, and elements will need to be repaired or replaced. The flip-up gates are clad with metal tread plates, coated in a non-slip material to create a safe, elevated promenade. The two-toned banding pattern on the gates highlights activity areas along the waterfront and can be seen on the inland side of the flood protection system when the gates are closed during a storm. Between Catherine and Market Slip, gliders and overlook seating provide quiet spaces to relax and gaze out over the East River. Near intersections, street names are engraved in the sides of the platform for wayfinding. At Market Slip, flip-up gates cannot be installed on top of a large sewer chamber underground, so a rolling gate is used instead, shown here in the open position, stored against a fixed flood wall. The ground level slopes up towards the opening in the wall to prevent tidal flooding. Looking towards the waterfront from South Street, a louvered metal screen encloses equipment stored against the flood wall and frames a dramatic waterfront entrance. Between Market and Pike Slip, gliders and benches offer more spaces to sit, relax, and enjoy the stunning views of the Two Bridges waterfront. At Pike Slip, the design is similar to Catherine Slip, with a flexible use space centered between social gathering areas. The ramp and stairs are located near the crosswalks for easy access from the neighborhood. Between Pike and Rutgers Slip, a playground, ping pong tables, and a climbing structure create an activity zone for kids and teenagers. The playground includes visual and tactile pieces that create a sensory play environment for 2 to 5-year-olds, while the climbing structure challenges older kids and teens. At Rutgers Slip, the ramp on the upland side leads to the top of the platform and a gathering area with lounges, game tables, and benches that look out over the existing planter to the river beyond. Just south of Pier 35, the raised platform widens to create space for a fitness area with a variety of equipment, including universally accessible pieces that everyone can enjoy. Next, let's take a closer look at the design of the flood infrastructure elements. The flood wall design will feature the same wavy patterns and elevation markers as the adjacent East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, or ESCR. The wave patterns change from short to long waves as you move along the flood wall. The roller and swing gates will be clad in a light gray metal and will feature the same etched banding and identification numbering system as the ESCR gates. The flood protection system ties into high ground at the Brooklyn Bridge, and the flood wall extends along the south side of the bridge towards South Street. A flip-up gate is used to cross South Street, maintaining pedestrian access along the sidewalk and vehicular access along South Street, except when the gate is deployed during storm events. The hydraulic power units that power the flip-up gates will also feature elevation markers and identification numbers on the concrete columns that house them. At Pier 35, flip-up gates cannot be installed on top of an underground sewer chamber. Instead, the design uses two swing gates stored against the flood wall to connect across the underground sewer. In front of Pier 36, where views and access to the waterfront are already blocked by the Pier 36 facilities, the design primarily consists of a flood wall, with roller gates used to provide driveway access for NYPD, sanitation, and other authorized vehicles. The flood wall curves in at the driveways to ensure clear sight lines for pedestrian safety. The design will also increase the width of the sidewalk to improve pedestrian conditions. Near Montgomery Street, a flip-up gate is again used to cross South Street, maintaining pedestrian sidewalk access and vehicular access, except when the gate is deployed during storm events. Finally, at Montgomery Street, the flood wall will be installed against an existing retaining wall around the PS 184 recreation yard. A small flip-up gate will be used to maintain access to the recreation yard. This project incorporates coastal flood protection with a significant investment in the drainage system. The Interceptor pipe carries large flows of water to the Manhattan pump station, which then pumps water to the Newtown Creek treatment plant in Brooklyn. In order to reach the Manhattan pump station, the Interceptor pipes in the BMCR project area connect to the Interceptor pipes in the ESCR project area. During a coastal storm event, the Interceptor pipe needs to be closed off at the north and south ends of the flood protection system so that floodwater doesn't enter the sewer and cause flooding from underground. Interceptor gates are being installed inside the pipe to prevent this from happening. An Interceptor gate building will be located on Robert Wagner Place, adjacent to the existing DOT yard. The building houses equipment that is needed to operate the underground Interceptor gate. The design of the building will include a small fenced-in area that will enclose a temporary generator brought to the site during storm events. The design will also improve the existing pedestrian conditions along South Street by extending the sidewalk and adding a crosswalk connection across Wagner Place. As part of the site design, Wagner Place will also be converted from a two-way to a one-way street. That brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and please stay in touch for future updates about this important resilience project.
Great, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Robot Lauren, for the presentation. We do have the real Lauren here to answer questions as well from the design team, but the recording makes it easier to sort of line up the timing with the interpretation. So thank you all for your patience during our presentation. I hope you learned some new information here. We're going to take just a couple seconds to pause to see if we have any last questions that need to be that need to be put together, and then we'll begin Q&A in just 1 minute. Great. So we had several questions come in over the chat during the meeting, and then I see a couple hands raised. So thank you, folks, for jumping in to participate. First question. Heather asks, has a similar plan been considered for north of Montgomery Street, and if not, why not? And I think, given that that's the ESCR project area, I would turn that to Jordan Salinger from the Mayor's Office of Recovery. Jordan?
Hi, everyone. It's Jordan Salinger with LMCR. Nice to see you tonight. It's a great question, and I think something to really think about with these resiliency projects is that there's there are no two that are going to be exactly the same. They are really defined by both their constraints. So we showed the kind of complex network of utilities that run this project area, as well as potential opportunities. And I think ESCR is just a fundamentally different project. There's different in spaces, doesn't have an elevated FDR drive, so the approaches will not naturally be the same. And then as we start talking about the project to the south of this area, and some of the land extension options that we are looking at, that's going to be have a different nature as well. So I think that's just something that throughout, just as there are no two parks that are exactly the same, certainly within the resiliency world, the approaches will differ based on both opportunities and constraints.
Great, thank you, Jordan. And then there was one more question in the chat before I saw the first hands being raised. That was from Tommy Loeb, and that is that's a question regarding the projections of what year's sea level rise projections will this project be built to be withstanding against. And I don't know, Jordan, if you want to take the first stab at that, or if we could go to Lauren for that as well.
Sure, I'll take the first pass, and Lauren, please add on. This project is being designed to the 2050s 100-year storm. And so 100-year storm, that's the coastal event. And 2050s is referring to specifically the sea level rise projections that we're using. And in this instance, it equates to about 2.5 feet, or about using the 90th percentile estimates from the New York Panel on Climate Change, NPCC, that we work with very closely, that helps to supply this data and validate the process. I don't know, Lauren, is there anything else you would add?
You gave a great explanation, Jordan. My only other comment there is that regarding sea level rise, as Jordan said, we're assuming 30 inches by the 2050s. And the low-level platform that the big flood infrastructure is built on top of is there to prevent tidal flooding that will be occurring by the 2050s. However, as we noted in the presentation, we're already starting to see the effects of that. The water levels can be up very close to the shoreline, and there are already days where water does come up and over, and so it will become effective very soon.
Great. So I think next in line, I saw Ms. Torres with her hand raised. Ms. Torres, how are you? Good evening. Oh, I'm sorry. Just as you came off mute, I muted you again. My apologies.
Can
Great.
you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good evening.
Okay, I will only address the section that affects Alfred E. Smith residents, which is Wagner Place and South Street up to Catherine. And so we just finished building a park that the children of Alfred E. Smith were part of the design. So my question is, whatever features you're putting in there, what input have the children of the community had to say in this design? I mean, and I say this because when we did the park in Smith, and they're ready to take the fence down and the whole 9 yards. It is absolutely beautiful, and we allowed the kids to pick what they wanted, the colors and everything else, because whatever we showed them was safe for them anyway. And the park is from, for toddlers to 5, and then the other section is for kids up to 11 years, and the school uses it. So my question once again is, what is it that you have? Because you really can't see this like this. You have a plan, but it's very hard to, in the Zoom, it's not the same as me having a piece looking at it.
Right.
You
So
know,
if I could ask Tanya, if you have the slides up, would you mind navigating to, and maybe Lauren, you could remind me where exactly which slide it is, but Ms. Torres, I'd be glad for us to bring back up the slide again. I think generally, so I'm not familiar with the playground that you're mentioning. I'd love to learn more. I think one of the biggest changes that we were able to make in moving from when we met with Smith Houses, I think in January or February, was the addition of the performance space.
right.
So,
Okay.
and then
That's
we also
Right.
have the gliders here, which is the sort of swing type thing that you see down at Pier 35, which we know is quite popular. So we were able to sort of move around. We decreased the number of basketball courts in this area, added some more picnic space, and added that performance space.
Okay.
In response to that feedback. I think the gliders are a really nice addition too.
I can't really distinguish what the gliders look like, to be honest with you. I mean,
I don't know if we have a. Okay, so this is actually a good opportunity for me to mention as we're looking. Is there another zoomed in version? These are generally the same sorts of like large bench size screen swings that are down on Pier 35 right now.
Okay. And that leads me to my final question. In terms of access for people with wheelchairs and walkers, because I have a lot of grandparents that are either in wheelchairs or walkers who watch their grandchildren. So the access. And by the way, on South Street, Wagner, what needs to happen is a light, and that street is already one way. It's always been one way. The only reason it's two way, it's a little piece, it's so the city workers can pull out and pull, instead of having to go around Smith, they can go onto South Street. It's like, it's not even a whole block. That's
right, just that very
two-way.
narrow section.
Right. And what needs to happen is there's a stop sign on the South Street on the Smith side, and it's like a fork. So what really needs to happen is lighting, is a light that directs the traffic, because it's crazy if you're going to make those changes. And the generator, you're going to bring in a generator, bring it in and out every time there's a flood.
So really quick before we go to that question, on the accessibility piece, I think it's a very good question. I think that's something we're sort of always working to balance, because obviously with the, to prevent the flooding, we need to have sort of raised elevated surfaces. So up and down the sort of raised platform, which will prevent against the sea rise, there are ADA accessible ramps at every so often, I think every block or so, which will for folks you have a mobility impairment to cross that quite easily.
Yeah, because you can't really tell, and that's why I'm asking.
Right.
You know.
So and then I'd also like to add on the the city lot on the corner. So that little one-way section, or the two-way to one-way section. So we're actually moving the gate for the city lot to South Street from Wagner Place. So the city, I don't know, Tanya, if we can go to very near the end, there's a graphic of the Interceptor building. But we're moving that gate sort of around the corner.
Right on South Street.
Right, exactly. So the
because it's not even like on Wagner Street. It's like diagonally
right,
kind of
right.
situation. Yeah, I have to cross it all the time, and I can't tell you how dangerous it is.
Right. So we are adding a new crosswalk there, and that should be improving that condition. The last thing that I'll mention is, I think regarding all of this, it's obviously you have here on the
There it goes. Should be here.
Perfect.
Right.
So I think generally, in addition to renderings that we have like this, and this presentation is going to be posted online,
Okay.
we also have who signed into the meeting and who we have your contact information. We're going to be posting on the website. We have 3 or 4 sort of 360 virtual reality tours of the project. So you'll sort of scroll around as if you're standing in a location along the project and see what it will look like when it gets completed. So we're really excited about that. I think that is just getting finished today. So we're going to have that posted on the website shortly, and hopefully that'll easier to grasp of what's going on, because this is a big project, of course.
Yeah. Oh, and my only other question is, when the rodents erupt, do you have a plan for rodents?
Right, of course. So as you might know, EDC is designing the project, and DDC, Department of Design and Construction, will be constructing it. They're here this evening, but I think generally we are going to be working with them on the construction handoff. So once we get into the construction phase, which will begin in late 2021, I'm sure that they'll be complying with all of the requirements for that. And I don't know if they're on the phone but want to say anything else. But obviously, again, with a project of this size, that's something that's very important to pay attention to.
Listen, with the construction that we've had in Smith because of Sandy resiliency, we have counted 167 boroughs in Smith. And so that's why I'm asking the question, because where are they going to go to? Everything else is concrete, and we're the ones that have all the grass and everything. So there needs to be a real serious conversation when this starts with us, because it's not fair to the residents. I don't think we need to be running into our buildings screaming to make sure the rats don't come out.
Understood. Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
The feedback. Thank you. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So sort of balancing the questions that are coming in through the chat and the folks who are in line on with their hands raised. I see a question from Mark Richardson, which came in through the chat, and that is how or will the gates and overall system be tested with some regularity? So for that, I'm going to turn to Lauren. We're going to go a little more into operations and maintenance for the next phase. So, but Lauren will be able to talk a little bit about the specs of the flood walls.
Sure. Well, and we also have our agency partners from DOT here as well, who will be responsible for operating and maintaining the system, and I think they can add some more detail. But we do have multiple methods to deploy the gates in the event of a storm, and we are developing, as part of this project, an operations and maintenance manual and a plan for emergency response scenarios. And as part of that manual and that plan, we'll be developing a regular maintenance routine for these gates to be tested and deployed and inspected before each hurricane season.
Great. And then before we go back to folks who are asking questions live, I see another question, which is, and one that we neglected to answer for Ms. Torres, which was, could we elaborate a little bit on why the generator needs to be brought to the Interceptor building as opposed to being permanently there, or how does the generator come into play? And I'm not sure if that's for Lauren or for our partners at DEP.
I can jump in here. Sure. So there is a backup generator that needs to be brought to the site. In the event of power loss during a storm scenario, we want to make sure we have the power there to be able to close and operate that critical interceptor gate underneath the ground. Because of the siting and the location of this building, we don't want to expand the footprint of the building or make it too large so that it wouldn't be able to fit within the site. And so the generator will be brought to the site during a storm event, and the fencing around it will be permanently installed so that those items don't need to be stored inside of the building, and the building interior can be room for all of the essential equipment only.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. So I see Trevor with his hand raised. Trevor, I'm going to ask you to unmute now.
Thank you, Will, and the BMCR team for this presentation and for assembling this. I know it's been many years in the making, and we're nearing year 5. So hopefully we can get construction started. I'm going to stack my questions because I see other people have raised their hands, and I know there's some unanswered questions in the chat. So my questions are, number one, and this may be something to note for later presentations or meetings, but is the construction going to be staggered, or will the entire pier be shut, or the entire Esplanade be shut down? Just by default, package 3 and package 4 and Pier 35 were staggered because of delays. But in the summertime and as we enter a new COVID reality, we're going to need to make sure we have open space or some type of mitigation for the folks that use that space frequently during really all the time. And also access to Pier 35 will remain at all times, since that's a beautiful pier that people use. I know we're at 75% design, so there's going to be some talk about refinements, but I see a lot of rails, and we like to offer some of the experience that we've had at Pier 35 is that a lot of these spaces, including the performance space down near Smith Houses, look like they could become de facto skate parks. So I hope there's some strategies in place to prevent these areas from being destroyed and the rails from being jump off points for folks. There is a very nice skate park underneath the Manhattan Bridge. It's well designed, and I think we should direct folks there. The Lower Manhattan or LMCR project, or the extension of the land near the seaport, is really boiling down to an extension of land. And I know the tie-in, depending on the design, is going to be a bit difficult, but some of the options, including looking at taking down the FDR, and I'm just wondering how that's going to work if we take down the FDR, starting at Brooklyn Bridge, and we keep the elevation going forward past north of the Brooklyn Bridge. Thank you for listening to our resolution last week about the lights at the intersections of Catherine Market, Pike, Rutgers, and possibly now Robert F. Wagner. There is an issue with bike and pedestrian safety and lots of conflicts. So I'm glad we were able to get a resolution asking for bike lights at those intersections so people can safely cross those roads. And we have the interaction that people experience now is really dangerous because they share the same bike lane. They're sharing the same lanes as bike, and if we had those lights across sections, I think we can alleviate some of those conflicts. And my last question is the flood walls that are at Pier 36 are really starting at Pier 35, going down past Pier 36, appear to close during the storm. I imagine they closed at some time before the storm. There's some critical services that will be behind those doors, including DSNY and FDNY. So I'm assuming that they've agreed to evacuate before they get locked in. Because the last thing we want is for one of the FDNY or special services to have to open one of those gates in the middle of a storm and compromise the system.
Great, thank you, Trevor. So to take those questions in order, so the first one, will construction be staggered during or phased during during construction of the? So generally, like I mentioned before, we are handing off the project to the Department of Design and Construction for the construction phase. They have been really actively participating in all of the design meetings to date so that we are coordinated from the beginning and not designing something that cannot be constructed. I think, Trevor, to one of your points, this is really, in terms of the urgency of the project, it is really critical that we get this done to, add protection to the neighborhood to mitigate it against climate change. So without speaking for DDC, who will be, once they get contractors on board, will be getting more into the means and methods, the schedule, et cetera, and they'll obviously keep you all well in the loop. It will obviously be a need to balance the necessity to get the flood protection infrastructure to the neighborhood as quickly as we can, while also making sure that any issues during construction are mitigated as possible. Obviously, like you mentioned, it's critical to have open space and outdoors available during COVID. So I think that that's something we can all consider. The concern about the skateboarders. So as you mentioned, we are at 75% design rather than and approaching 100% final design early next year, the first or second quarter of next year. So we have sort of a concept and high level of where all the elements will be, large elements, but we are going to be adding some specificity to the project as we go along. So we have definitely heard from Community Board 3 that there's a desire for elements that make it difficult to skateboard on elements that are not intended for that. The FDR. So I can let DOT chime in as well, but I think the main sort of distinction that I would draw when you ask about how does this project work if the FDR comes down is that in the neighboring areas of the financial district and Seaport, that is a longer term master planning exercise that we do not unfortunately have a funded project for. That is, we are looking at alternatives and working closely with DOT on how to make something work from a transportation perspective as well as a resiliency perspective. But I would say that in this neighborhood, we have an implementable capital project that does work around the FDR. So, we are going to, move ahead and build it as such. And then, what, of course, if there is a decision to fund a project later that involves that, figure out the implications of that. So there was another question from Trevor.
Pier 36.
Pier 36 does host several facilities, including sanitation, fire department, as well as a DOT yard. So generally, and as Lauren mentioned earlier, we are still working out the operations plan of this project. What will actually happen when the gates do get closed, and we will have more details on that in early next year at the next one of these meetings. But generally, the Office of Emergency Management will be the entity that says such a storm is closing or such a storm is coming for which we need to close the gates. So in coming up with this plan, we have met and consulted with our partner agencies that maintain facilities there, and obviously the emergency management in terms of making the call on shutting those the gates. We would obviously be working together as a city to ensure that the necessary emergency response vehicles, personnel, equipment are evacuated from there first. I also noticed a question from Scott Baker in the chat, which was, are there any plans for the garbage truck shed, Basketball City EMS station on Pier 36? That question, just since we're sort of on the same topic, since those facilities, some of which are managed by EDC, some of which are managed by DCAS, a partner agency of ours, all of those structures are on a pier over water. So it was not feasible to design a flood protection project that protected those because the water can come from beneath as well. But like I mentioned, we are, of course, coordinating with those agencies to ensure that when the gates do need to be operated and closed, that we are, coordinating with them and that they are able to remove and evacuate the equipment and personnel they need to. So next I want to go to Frank, who I see has his hand raised. Frank, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you very much, Will, and thank you also to the BMCR team. I just have two quick questions. One of them is, I've seen these probably this presentation before, and I just noticed again that it looks like when it comes, this question is about bike safety and pedestrian safety. And I brought this up before, and it seems to me that you guys have pictures of illustrations of the kind of interactive usage of people coming in and out of the park. And we'd like to ideally think that it's at the crosswalks. I don't think that's necessarily going to be how it plays itself out in real life. But I'm wondering, because the bike path is part of an overall design with the city that loops around the Big U and upwards, that you will have people who are not necessarily in the community going through, and you also have a community in particular, for those of us that live nearby, there's a lot of night activity and a lot of seniors that use all the different kind of activity play areas. And I'm wondering if there's consideration, I don't know what it would be. I know there's liability about having certain things on the ground, but safety considerations to remind people that when they're crossing into the bike lane, so that there is none of that friction between bike riders and pedestrians, because I think you're designing something that's going to be really activated for use. And like I said, this is a community that uses it up until very late at night. And I'd like to see some implementation where you're kind of avoiding that kind of friction between the communities of bike riders who may not even live nearby and are just using that as a passageway, and the people that really want to interact with their park. And then my second question actually has to do with, this was something new that I didn't catch before, and I'd like just to have a repeat on this because it stood out. I wasn't clear on what it was. Something to do with the Interceptor gate being closed during superstorms, if I wrote this down correctly, to prevent flooding in sewer systems. Because I do have concerns just for the general neighborhood, even beyond rising seawaters, you have superstorms and accumulation, and what the development is for the catch basins, like the sewer systems and the drainage, et cetera. So hearing that I mean, I get it that the gates will be closed during the superstorms to prevent going in, but is there any development beyond the intercept, like in terms of the sewage drainage? I just want to hear more explanation on that, please. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Frank. Yeah. So on the first question, yeah, absolutely. I think you're completely right, and the reason that this is a movable flood protection device and not just a big wall is because we know that it's very important for the community to have views and access, and we're very excited and hope that what you said comes true in regard to a lot of people using the amenities and continuing to use the Esplanade. We have Jennifer here from DOT who I'd like to call on to give a few more remarks regarding the bike and pedestrian safety, since they're really the experts there. I know that Jennifer joined us last week at Community Board 3, and we generally follow DOT's standards in terms of how we're working with bikes and pedestrians. So Jennifer, could I invite you to say a few words?
Sure, thanks, Will. Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Frank, for your question and your comments. Just to introduce myself, I'm Jennifer Santinez. I'm DOT's Manhattan Deputy Borough Commissioner. I'm also joined tonight by my colleagues in the Resiliency Planning and Management team. As Will mentioned, Adam and I did attend last week's CB3 Transportation Committee meeting, where some of these concerns about conflicts between cyclists and pedestrians were raised. And I know Trevor had mentioned that we are taking a look at particular intersections and points of conflict, specifically speaking at Catherine, Margaret, Pike, and Rutgers Flip. So I do just want to remind folks that these particular greenway segments are not under DOT's maintenance jurisdiction, but as the right of way and cyclist and pedestrian safety, falls under our purview. We are going to evaluate and review this request internally and provide recommendations to the design team if appropriate. We're just going to take a look to see what other additional elements could be added to these locations. And so Frank, if there's any other particular locations, not just, you know, like a general concern, if you want us to take a look at more locations other than just those flip crosswalks, please, you know, feel free to write to the team and we will evaluate that as well.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Regarding the Interceptor gate, I'd like to turn that to Lauren. Tanya, would you mind if we navigate to very near the end? There's an overhead map that I'd like to start with on slide 60 something. Generally, Frank, like you said, the role of the Interceptor gates is to essentially, since we're building a wall in front and around of the neighborhood, we don't want to have storm surge that may come from other neighboring areas essentially come under or behind the flood protection, since that would, you know, make it not, you know, come around the backside to still flood the neighborhood. But Lauren, I wonder if you could speak in a little bit more detail as to the overall scope of the drainage work and Interceptor gate work.
Sure, I can. Although I think actually the best person to speak to that is my colleague, Paul Brewer. Paul, if you could unmute and speak to that. He's one of our lead civil engineers and knows this inside out.
Sure, hi, thanks. So yeah, the question was just a little bit more information on the purpose of the Interceptor gate and how it will function during a deployment event. So as Will said and Lauren said, the gate that's at the south on the screen, the south BMCR Interceptor gate, will keep the Interceptor sewage flow from the south from coming into the Two Bridges area. And the design storm that we are designing for is not only for the storm surge that's coming overland, but also that coinciding with a storm rain event. So the rain and sanitary sewage would be able to flow into the Interceptor. There'd be excess capacity because nothing would be coming from the south, and that sewage would flow to the north towards the pump station and ultimately to the treatment plant. So it's basically the system can accommodate both storm sewer, sanitary sewer, and storm surge at the same time.
And I think, Paul, maybe part of Frank's question was also, is there additional surface level drainage work? Like, are we installing new catch basins? Is there the need to do additional drainage work on the surface, or are we accommodated within the existing system?
No, we're accommodated generally within the existing system. There's a few locations where we may be putting in a couple of catch basins or moving some things around, but by and large, we're using the existing infrastructure that's there.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Actually, well, there's one other thing I just want to add. Related note, this question did come up around this time last year when the existing water main underneath the Esplanade had a leak and flooded part of the neighborhood. So just as you all know, as part of this project, one of the things that we're doing while we do construction out on the Esplanade is that we are relocating and actually replacing and rebuilding that existing water main. So there will be a new one put in, which is a big improvement.
Yes, all the water infrastructure in the project limits is being replaced. And it is quite old, as you said.
Great. All right, thank you, Paul and Lauren. So to go to another question from the chat, there's two questions we can maybe combine together. Carter Craft asked how many different manufacturers exist who make these large flip-up gates? And Heather also asked in the world. Regarding elsewhere, has the system been used? The ESCR project to the north is also going to be using a limited number of deployables as well. But regarding the other global precedents, as well as sort of how and where these are manufactured, I would turn that to Lauren and to Jordan. So yeah, so Lauren and Jordan, regarding have the flip-up gates been used elsewhere in the world? Where do we source them from? That sort of thing.
Sure, I can start, and then Jordan, you can jump in, or even some of my other colleagues from AECOM if there are things to add here. But yes, these flip-up gates have been used elsewhere in the world. In particular, a number of them are in use today in New York City. Gates like this have been installed. Sorry, I need to remember to speak a little slower live for our interpreters. Apologies. It's easier on a pre-recorded video. So in New York City, a number of these gates have been installed. There are some already at the Javits Center. We've also seen them in action at the NYU Langone hospitals. Some of them are as tall as the gates that we're installing here. We've seen them up to 10.5, 11 feet high, 50 feet long. What is unique about this project is the full length of how many gates in a row we are deploying. It's something that's actually really exciting as a part of this project. But yes, these gates have been used in urban coastal environments and proven very effective. Jordan, do you want to add on, or even Antoine or James from AECOM?
I thought that was great, but other AECOM folks, if you have things to add, please do.
I think, Lauren, you've got it covered.
Great. Very good. Thank you, Lauren. So I see, let's go back to an in-person question. I see Daniel with his hand raised. Daniel, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thanks. My question's kind of a follow-up to Frank's question. Going back to my reading of the ESCR EIS, as well as a statement of a DEP engineer at a Community Board 3 Parks meeting. And when the Interceptor is closed at Coraliers, the DEP engineer said some words that I'm not going to use, but said that the places south of there are going to be flooded, assuming that there's a storm surge along our whole east side, as well as a rain event in the Lower East Side and 2 bridges, which is easy to assume during a superstorm. As well as in your renderings, I thought I saw with the gates open, blocking storm surge, it looked like South Street was still flooded. I don't know if I missaw that, but yeah, so my question is, like, if we keep closing these interceptors, everything to the south of there is going to get flooded, backed up with sewage, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah, so Dan, for that, let's see, Lauren or maybe James, would you like to take that one?
So I think if we're talking about the sewer system, I would again like to defer to Paul Bruick, who could speak to it more eloquently than I can. However, I think you made a comment about a rendering looking like South Street was still flooded. And so, Tanya, I think it's your screen we're sharing. If you could flip back to slide 38, and Daniel, let me know if this is I think this is the rendering you were talking about. We do show the gates are in their vertical position, so deployed, and we're on the sort of inland or dry side of the flood protection system. In this illustration, there is still some water on South Street. We're just trying to be realistic that during a major coastal storm, there's not just water coming in from the river, but there's also rain happening. And so what we're showing there is just rainwater hitting South Street. That's not a depiction of the coastal flooding coming inland.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And Paul, are you there for the follow-up?
Sure, yeah. I can't speak to the document that you read or what the DEP representative might have said in a document or in a meeting. We did a pretty extensive hydraulic model that we coordinated not only with DEP, but with the project, the ESCR project, or ESCR project to the north, to make sure that the projects would work in tandem and would handle, again, both the storm and the sanitary without flooding the neighborhood. Because as you said, if the neighborhood is flooded from stormwater but protected from storm surge, we've only done half the job. So it will work for both, and the models show that it will work for both. One thing I maybe is kind of unique is that for the FEMA accreditation, the projects they're designed to work in tandem, but they also need to work alone. So if one was to not get built for any reason, the project that does get built would still have to work on its own. But because they're in tandem, when our gate is activated to the south, the closest gate to the north of the two bridges area would not need to be closed. So that would, again, it's a protection measure so that the storm sewage would not flood the two bridges area.
Hey, Will, this is Ken Lam from DEP. Yeah, so just to answer, I guess the question, right? So when that question came up about Esker, you know, once you put in those interceptor gates, you're isolating the Esker area from the upstream and the southern area, which was BMCR at the time, right? BMCR was not in the, you know, it's the next project coming online. So once BMCR comes online, then you have the southern gate in BMCR, which will isolate the Esker and BMCR project from, you know, the areas north and south of these two project areas. So that's why once you have a storm surge, you know, flood water, surge water is going to inundate the areas outside of the protected areas. So that's why we said, you know, when you do have a Sandy-like storm event, the areas in the unprotected area, it's going to get, you know, the sewers are going to get flooded. You're going to get sewer backups. That's just how it is.
Great. And yeah, and with this project going online, this would be a protected area, not an unprotected area. So it's good to go.
Great. And I think while the folks on the drainage side are still kind of on deck, we also got a question, just trying to lump as many of the similar questions as I can together, from Tanya and her own. Good evening, Tanya, about the capacity at the Newtown Creek wastewater treatment plant. So could we just confirm that with that plant has plenty of capacity to handle the volumes that we're talking about?
Yes, confirmed.
Okay. Great. Okay, thank you, Paul. So going to move on now and do one more question from the chat, and then we'll go back to live questions. So Anna asked if we mentioned what was going to happen to the recently finished Pier 35. We also got a question, what is happening with the existing amenities that were recently built, the miniature turf field and exercise equipment, for example, and sort of why those projects are just getting built while we're also talking about a new project. So those are great questions. Regarding Pier 35 first, Pier 35 is outside of the scope of this project and will essentially remain as is, although it will be outside of the flood protection. That said, EDC also designed that project, and it was designed with sort of using the resilient models resilient materials, and be able to sort of understand that it's going to be near salt water and could get flooded. Regarding the existing amenities, so that was from Laird Gallagher. So that's a great question. Catherine or Jordan on my team may chime in as well, but I think I would say first that it's a great question about sort of why are we duplicating existing amenities. I think essentially the answer to that is that the East River Waterfront Esplanade project, which is everything south of Pier 35 all the way down to the Battery Maritime building, which is south of Wall Street, as part of the East River Waterfront Esplanade project, was funded by LMDC, the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation. LMDC got a grant after 9/11 for reconstruction and restoration of various assets and places in Lower Manhattan, and we have been working with LMDC to implement that project. After that project was sort of underway in design, Hurricane Sandy happened. We subsequently received from the federal government an additional grant to construct this project, and essentially it's unfortunate that there's sort of overlapping projects here, but we are doing our best to preserve the spirit and the design intent of the original project, since there was a whole lot of community input that went into that, of course, while also providing the flood protection. Catherine, is there anything else that you'd like to add on that?
Yes, hi. I'll just add too that the amenities at the front, at edge, at the water's edge. The BMCR project, it was maintaining those, the planters, that whole system of railing. And as folks of you that have been out at the package 4 area, that has been opening in phases and will be fully open over the next week or so. The area, we reduced the scope obviously of it. And so there are some amenities that are impacted, the turf field, for example, but the bulk of the work to the water's edge will be preserved.
Great, thank you, Catherine. And Laird, we also did modify the scope of the Brooklyn Bridge Esplanade project, which is the only section of the Esplanade that's not in construction down near Wagner Place, to make sure that we weren't duplicating something, since that project has yet to begin construction. That's likely beginning construction in early next year. So let's go back now to live questions. I see Christina Zhang with her hand up. Hello, Christina.
All right. Oh. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, good evening.
All right, hi, how are you? Thanks for the presentation to you and the whole team. Just a very few quick questions. I noticed that there's like a really large stretch of passive space between, I think, Catherine and Pike. And I'm just wondering, like, I'm not sure how set you are with the design, but would it be possible to put some sort of like activity in there? There's like, a lot of kids in Knickerbocker, or like, something for seniors. I think that would be nice for the residents who live here. And the other thing I just want is the lighting along this whole stretch, because as it is now, it's pretty dark in some places. So I just want to make sure, like, in the construction phase, that there is adequate lighting throughout the whole project. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks, Christina. So regarding, so I guess generally, we work really closely with the Parks Department regarding design of the amenities in this space. We, as some folks may know, sort of share the jurisdiction of this space between EDC and the Parks Department. So we work with them quite a lot in designing. So I would love, in regard to design intent around the passive areas between Catherine Slip and Market Slip, for if we have Grace or Ricardo on, as well as maybe Lauren.
Okay, well, I can start. Christina thinks it's a great question, and I think it's one that we've been talking about for a few years now, as we've evaluated the existing amenities and what's going to get disrupted and what else can we put into place. So one thing that we've strived to do is provide a real balance of different types of spaces along the waterfront, making sure that we respond to community requests, some of which have been for a lot of passive areas, seating, benches, quiet spaces to just hang out and relax, in combination with a lot of more active uses for both younger and older community members. One thing that we've done with situating these is to provide some of the active uses as close as possible to where people are living. And I understand Knickerbocker isn't just, with the dimensions of this little 3D view that we're seeing here, isn't quite on the map. It's one block further inland, but is adjacent to Catherine Slip. And so we're hoping that those residents still have close access to the active spaces that are existing between Catherine and Robert Wagner Place. And we're placing some of those more passive areas with the seating and with the gliders directly across from blocks where residents aren't immediately located. So across from the mini storage facility, or between Market and Pike, right in front of an existing active use area, which is the Murray Bertram Field. So it's about creating a rhythm of spaces and a diversity of different experiences along the waterfront. And that's, it's something that we've been discussing and have kind of modified over time in response to different feedback that we've gotten from various residents.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And then regarding lighting, Christina, I think as we had, that's another sort of finer point detail that as we get closer to final design in the springtime, we should know more on. But I know that we're having sort of ongoing design meetings with our partners at Parks regarding lighting. So we'll certainly keep that feedback in mind. Great. I see Grace Mack with her hand up. Grace, good evening.
Hi, good evening. I just have a few questions. You know how where Pier 35 is very active during the summer, where people like to lie down during the small patch areas, the grass areas, and a lot of the esplanade is under the it's under the FDR, so there's not a lot of sunlight over there, and there seems to be a lack of where there's sun ray, where people can just lie down and enjoy picnics or stuff. This might be an idea that would help in terms of making the back of Pier 36, where it's a lot of negative activities going on, and it will kind of make it turn it into a more beautified area if we can maybe make that more of a stretch of like what Pier 35 is with grass, and beautify it in a way where it's in a positive light for people to enjoy, as well as set like a path lane for people to jog, or a pathway for them to enjoy being closer to the pier. That's something where the back of the dock area is not being well used right now, so that's a suggestion that would really help activate it in a positive light, where people can really use that. And it needs to be well lit, first of all, because it's so dark there. So that's why there is also the reason why there's so much negative activities, that fireworks, illegal drug use and everything. And then also the part with the bike. I don't know if this is, logistically, that you can address that logistically or, financially in any way, but maybe could you raise it in a way where it's like more like a ramp, rising up during where the intersections of, where, it just rises up, so that it's not interfering with, the pedestrians on, trying to cross or something like that. I don't know. Again, I'm just throwing ideas of, possibly, addressing the bike lane issue. And then with this is a follow-up with Christina's about Catherine and Pike, where there's like a lot of open space and striking a balance. There's not a lot of like cultural art or sculptures in the whole entire area, so maybe you can incorporate that. Something that you can reference to South Street Seaport, where they have, it's very cultural. They have a lot of nice sculptures and artwork everywhere, displayed periodically and interchanging from time to time. That's something that should be highly considered, of interest to residents and to people who visit, this area. So, those are my points.
Great, thank you, Grace. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. So yeah, I think regarding Pier 36, and I saw in the chat, Wendy as well asked a question about the backside of Pier 36 along the dock. So thank you both for bringing that up. As you know, that's something that we have certainly heard that feedback from the community in the past. I do want to be clear though that with this project that's outside of the scope of this project. The bulk of the funding for the project is federal money that is specifically tied to the resilience features here. So we do need to sort of stay focused on that, and Pier 36 is outside of the scope of that. But I certainly appreciate that you all continue to advocate for that, and ask that we continue that conversation as we go along. Obviously, the value of having a complete connected waterfront greenway is really important and is not lost on us. But I think it's always sort of a question of resources. So the Grace, I would say on the upland portions as well, from a design intent, we are doing our best to kind of fit as much activity as we can in there. Of course, there are quite a lot of both underground and above ground, such as the FDR limits. So I think there are often spaces where somebody might see within the design that there's sort of a puzzling choice or a lack of amenities, but typically there are some pretty significant challenges below grade on from an infrastructure perspective. So we did our best to weave the project throughout that infrastructure. I want to go next. I see that Rocky Chin has his hand. Rocky, I'm going to ask you to unmute now.
Hi, Will. Actually, I won't repeat what the previous questioner, but I actually did have that question because we've been going back and forth regarding Pier 42, and I guess the general question is, you were mentioned that Basketball City and those areas, in Pier 35 and so forth, are going to get flooded. That's the anticipation. Are the other piers, like the Brooklyn Bridge Park piers, are all those going to get flooded during the storm that we're talking about? And I guess the related question is, when we eventually do get to talking about Pier 42, not the temporary one, but isn't that a resiliency issue too? Or is it going to be built so it's not going to get flooded, or has anybody talked about that? So I know that that's not part of this plan, but it seems to me a little bit disconnected when we're talking about the whole area. The question I had, so maybe that's one question. The other is, your diagrams are very interesting, especially when you kind of bring you down to the level of what it might look like. But I think in the northern part, around the Shangwen School and Basketball City, you don't have any diagrams like that. And I think that would really help, because it's, especially when you talk about design, it's not exactly clear. You would mention there's going to be a pretty big wall there for some, there's going to be more of a structure there than some other parts because it's already blocked. But I don't know if you want to kind of show people more. The last thing in terms of is more communication. This project, we don't know exactly how long it's going to take and which pieces are going to finish first. But you also have the escrow project going on, which could take even longer. So I really do think this issue about bike lanes and joggers needs to be integrated in some way in terms of both communicating with the public, but also in the designers as to, because you could have a whole bunch of problems in terms of traffic flow, especially if these things are not done at the same time, because you don't seem to have necessarily coordination. So I mentioned that because the section that the structure that goes in Corlears Hook Park, that's the southernmost part with the gate there, is the end of that. And then you have this project. That whole, what's going on between those two projects, it seems to me, needs to be clarified a little bit more, because also the bike lane, if the park closes, then you have to move the bike lanes off the park, and you're going to have to move them someplace, and nobody's really kind of clarified. I know they're working on it, but I think we need to have a lot more public information. It has to be timely, etc. So,
of course,
otherwise,
yeah. No, of course. Well, thank you for your questions, Rocky. I think yeah. So generally, I know that it can be a little bit frustrating in terms of lack of information about construction. We will, like I mentioned earlier, DDC, who's going to be constructing the project, is already attending design meetings. So again, just to sort of reiterate that, it's important we have them in the room now so that we're designing something that can be implemented. I think once we get closer to construction, which again, it's supposed to be beginning construction late next year, there'll be more information, and we, up until a certain handoff point, will be in coordination with you as well as DDC to do adequate public notifications regarding any sorts of closures, obviously getting all the permits necessary, complying with all the public notice requirements that are associated with that. But I think, appreciate you all bearing with us while we, finish up design and get to construction, because once there's a contractor on board, it'll really be, a lot more, we'll be able to address issues like how will we be handling rodents, how will we be handling traffic, et cetera. I think regarding the, up by the Strong Winds School, on this page, you can see sort of where that last tie-in is at Montgomery Street and South Street. So the wall is actually quite shallow when you get to that point. Across the street on the side of Pier 36, there will be a larger wall. But yeah, we don't have too many graphics on that, unfortunately, because there's, it's somewhat kind of standard throughout. But yes, Tanya, thank you for zooming in there. And we will post this presentation online so that you can zoom and manipulate it to see for yourself. Lauren, is there something you wanted to mention on that?
Yeah, just to clarify that we're, Tanya, could you scroll back to where we're actually seeing the illustration of the wall, just to make sure it's clear in this graphic? And I understand it would be, in an ideal world, we'd have really illustrative sort of picture views of every square inch of the site. But for this view right here, what we're showing, just to be clear, the part that's coming up really high is actually an existing fence around the recreation yard there. That's not something that we are installing as part of this project. There's an existing very tall fence. There's also an existing wall around the bottom where our flood wall is going. We're building a flood wall just immediately in front of the existing wall. It's going to come up a couple extra feet higher than the existing wall, but for the most part, the flood infrastructure condition there is largely in keeping with what is already existing on the site.
That's a good point. Thanks, Lauren. And then regarding the first question you had, Rocky, regarding sort of planning to be flooded, like we talked about with Pier 35. Yeah, so when we, generally, when we are designing waterfront infrastructure, we do need to consider that we don't want to have to replace something immediately after constructing it. We generally design, sort of using a material palette of things that can withstand flooding and can sort of be cleaned off as best as possible. But of course, during a violent storm that we had, like during Hurricane Sandy, you would expect things to be damaged somewhat. Regarding Pier 42, just a really quick side note on that, the bathroom, the comfort station for that is actually elevated above the required level because there are different requirements associated with putting a building in the floodplain versus putting, an open park space. So when there's an open park space, we do our best to design with materials and in a manner that is, expects it to get wet sometimes. We can't prevent all damage, but we can do our best. And then when there are structures, there's, sort of different requirements. So unfortunately, with the city facilities on Pier 36, they are buildings over water, and it's difficult to sort of protect those against flooding. But again, we're going to coordinate. So let's see.
Well, can I add a point?
Yeah.
So I think, I mentioned before in determining alignments that, we really have to look at constraints. And so in particular, when thinking about Pier 36 area, Pier 42, those are piers. Piers, they sit on pier structures. And so the sort of technology that we're using, these flip-up gates do require, not only are they very heavy, but they require foundations. Those are basically impossible to situate on top of pier structures. So, I know a number of those facilities have been embarking on kind of building level improvements, whether it's elevating mechanicals, kind of other building appropriate measures. But it was a sharp question and certainly an issue. We have 520 miles of coastline. This issue is not unique to this location.
Great, thank you. So I see in the chat folks are referring back to previous questions that I believe Tanya asked. I did see Tanya had her hand raised, although she may have had to step out. I'd be happy to wait for her to get back if somebody knows if she's able to come back. Otherwise, we can. Oh, she's still here. Tanya, I'll ask you to unmute if you'd like. All right, so we can come back to Tanya. I see.
Well, hi everyone.
Oh, hey, good evening.
It's kind of noisy with my 10-month-old in the background.
Oh, it's
That's
okay.
why I was texting. Yeah.
I'd be happy to just read them out since you did type them in if you'd prefer that.
Can you please, and let me just introduce
Of course,
myself
of course.
really quickly before she starts telling.
All right,
I'm
great.
sorry,
Thanks for
everyone.
joining us. It's nice to see you.
My name is Tanya Castro, and I have been a resident of 265 Terry Street since 1979. I am the Lands End 2 Resident Association co-chair of the Board of Directors, and I've served my residents since 2013. My questions that I've presented, the responses have to go back to my residents. And many of them tried to attend this meeting via call-in, but unfortunately they needed translators. So they came to my door and have been knocking since. So please, if you can give more detail to all of my questions, I'd really appreciate that. But yes, if you can lay back to my questions, that'd be great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Tanya, I'm glad you're here. Yeah, so really quickly to note, yeah, unfortunately the Zoom translation interpretation feature is only available through the computer platform. But like I mentioned earlier, we will have the videos uploaded in each of the interpreted languages after. So I hope that helps. Thank you, Tanya, for mentioning this. So I'm going to read out a couple of Tanya's questions, which she put in the chat previously. So there was a section regarding the Newtown wastewater treatment plant, which we did cover. The other questions included, is the basketball court moving south? How far? Actually, why don't we start with that one? I can read them individually as we go. So Lauren, would you just remind us on why the basketball court had to move from its current location to where we did put it?
Sure. So the basketball courts are currently located in the northern part of the site near Rucker Slip. And unfortunately, the flood protection alignment, again, due to a lot of the site constraints that we showed earlier, is running down the middle of the esplanade. So it runs right through the location of those existing basketball courts, and we cannot keep the courts in their current location. We do understand through all the conversations we've had with the community that these are really heavily used. People are on them all the time and playing games all the time. So we want to keep that existing use, but we have to relocate it to another place on the site. Tanya, if you could flip to slide 29. So here, where we're putting a new half court in place of the ones that we are disrupting, we're moving one near Robert Wagner Place. And the reason it's being located here and not elsewhere on the site is that in this location, it's very unique to the rest of the project in that the flood protection system, which you see the dark gray band running down the middle of the esplanade, it's close enough to the water side and the whole esplanade is wide enough that we can actually fit a basketball court on the dry side next to the flood protection alignment, not on top of it. So this is pretty much the only location where we can actually feasibly put a court available for play. So that's why we're moving it.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, it was, we do understand that that's a challenge, and, that's disappointing to some folks. It's really about fitting whatever we can, wherever we can. So a couple other questions from Tanya. In the event there is a mishap during the project, are there additional funds available to resolve damage to continue the project and ensure the project is completed? I want to also loop a question in that Heather asked earlier in the chat, which is, has COVID affected the finances available for this project? So regarding sort of funding, generally, I won't speak, we'll speak quickly for DDC, who is going to be doing the construction, but the city has very stringent insurance requirements for its contractors, and we maintain sites as safely as we can, and there are sort of contingencies available if there are any sort of challenging circumstances that come up. But I think regarding funding in general, like I mentioned earlier, the project is primarily funded with a $176 million grant from the federal government from the NDR program, National Disaster Resilience. We are we are working right now with our partners in the federal government, including Congressmember Velasquez, to get an extension on the amount of time that we're able to spend those funds. There's currently a deadline that is in place that we project with the challenging situation where we had to delay the project due to COVID, that we will need an extension on those on the use of those funds. But we are also working with a number of other state and municipal governments across the country who are also in such a situation where there are many governments who had to pause the design work or construction work of these resiliency projects. So we've been working closely with our representatives as well as those other municipalities and states to push for an extension to those funds so that we can deliver projects like this to the neighborhood. So the short answer is that we had to delay the project because of COVID. The city was, we were not, essentially the city was only spending money on COVID relief for about 3 or 4 months during the summer, but unfortunately we are past that. The money is there, and then separately we're working on that extension issue with the federal government. Tanya, you also asked, during construction, will there be tarping along the area preventing debris from getting on the parks, streets, and sidewalks? So that's another great question. I think, like I mentioned before, we'll do our best to get you more information in the springtime at our next meeting once we're at full design. But I think the important thing to note now is that there will be a lot more information on what construction looks like and on what sorts of ways the city and its contractors will be being good neighbors to all of you during construction. But that information will be available later on next year.
Well, I mean, DDC is here, but also just in general, the contract documents do require the contractor to protect existing features. There'll be different measures for dust control, erosion control. There'll be fencing for protection of the public and other safety features. There's technical codes, there's city codes that that require that protection, and then there are obviously mechanisms for handling wayward contractors, but hopefully that's not the issue, but for really handling issues and concerns from the neighborhood and things that need to be fixed.
Thank you, Catherine. That's good detail. Ms. Torres, I see you have another question. Thanks for your patience. I'm going to ask you to unmute now.
Okay, it's also on the same topic as Tanya. One of the biggest issues for this community is 9/11 debris that was never cleaned in our area. I can definitely tell you for Smith, and the protection of the dust. People with asthma, respiratory problems has increased. Since I've had construction in Smith, I have had so many patients, so many residents become ill with 9/11 related cancers. So it's a real issue for me to make sure that the residents are safe. Now we have the COVID, and so I can't begin to tell you how sad it is. When you see people younger than you or my kids' age dying of cancer related from 9/11. And so that's a biggie for us. We have a high rate of asthma and it's not only in Smith, but down the line. And so that's important. And I would recommend that the people who are sitting here, or there be like some kind of community advisory to make sure that as the project moves along, the contractors are in communication with the community that they're supposed to be serving. That's I think, because that's a big issue, the dust and the dirt from that.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That really can't go unsaid. And I think the DEP maintains really strict guidelines for contractors in regard to noise and dust and things like that. Like Catherine said just now, the contract documents typically that the city will have with a contractor do stipulate sort of precautions that need to be taken in regard to things like that. And I think as we get closer to construction, which is still, towards the end of next year, there'll be a lot more conversation around those specifics. I think the design phase should wrap up in the next probably 4 or 5 months, and then we'll be able to move on to construction and get into a lot of that detail, because we understand that this is an important project for the community, both from the flood protection and the amenities sense, and we need to get it done, but we also need to get it done right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're a little past 8, but I see a few more questions. We are available to stay for a little bit longer. Let's see. I see a question from Elaine in the chat. What is the plan for inspection of the flip-up gates themselves for cracks or connection gaps separate from the hydraulic functionality? So like I mentioned, we're going to have sort of a maintenance and operations plan that AECOM, as part of the design team, will deliver to us as part of the design for this project. But Lauren, would you like to say a little bit more about what you know about these right now in terms of maintenance?
Sorry, Will, would you mind repeating that question?
Yeah, of course. The question was regarding sort of ongoing inspection of the gates for both making sure that they connect to each other properly, noticing cracks, noticing other sort of structural wear.
Oh, yes. So again, that's something that the details of our operation and maintenance plan, which we're putting together for this project, is part of the updates that we'll be sharing at our next public meeting in the spring. And we're working closely with our agency partners at DOT, who will be operating and maintaining these gates, to develop a plan to make sure that the gates are always in good working condition before each hurricane season.
Great. Thank you, Lauren. There is a question from Trevor in the chat. This question says, will this project achieve FEMA accreditation, and will this lower flood insurance rates? It's a great question. I would probably also turn this to AECOM and to Jordan, but we do intend for this to be a project that complies with those guidelines, yes. Lauren and Jordan, is there any more detail that you'd like to add there in terms of what that process looks like?
I would just add that yes, that's certainly the intent. And in fact, we met with FEMA earlier today and plan to do so, to 100% design and into the future, before construction and beyond, quite frankly, because it's a conversation that we need to have with FEMA, and I certainly don't want to speculate, but the intent is that once we accredit the system, then after that the maps would change. But once again, it's kind of early in the conversation with FEMA, but anticipate going that route.
Jordan. Great. And if there are folks who are on the phone, I just want to remind folks on the phone that they can press *9 to raise their hand. I want to make sure that if there's anybody on the phone who has a question and wants to ask a question, they can answer that. So *9 if you're on your phone to raise your hand. Other questions that we have in the chat. This is one from Bruce W. Are there any major disagreements about the coastal resiliency designs between the city and the community? What are those concerns? That's a great question, Bruce. I think what our hope is that this is sort of the culmination and getting towards the end of a process where we've spoken with the community quite frequently and in depth on this project. I think the things along the way that were challenging that we've had to work through include sort of in the early concept days when we determined that in order to preserve access and views to the water, we would need to use the deployable flip-up gates as much as possible versus any fixed structure. And then I think we've had a lot of good conversation with the community regarding amenities. I think obviously, like someone mentioned earlier, it's difficult to see. We understand the Esplanade being nearly complete after a lot of design and construction work, and then to have another project come in and sort of modify that. There have been a lot of constraints in terms of all the DEP infrastructure underground. There's sewers, there's gas lines and electric lines, there's the FDR overhead. This is a very, very constrained site. So to weave the flood protection between that, especially movable flood protection has been quite a challenge. But we've, we have done our best, and the design team has done their best, and I want to give them kudos for that, to fit things like the performance space you saw, the basketball courts, the gliders, wherever we can. So we appreciate folks understanding that this is first and foremost a resiliency project, but we've done our best to make this an attractive public space as best we can, in addition to that. Let's see, other questions. Aaron Gonzalez and Daisy ask, is this plan going to affect the City Water Tunnel number 1 access site, which is located near the southeast corner of the block, bounded by Cherry, South, and Clinton Streets? I'm not sure about who to turn that one to. Lauren, Jordan, Ken from DEP, does that ring a bell to either of you? And the question is regarding City Tunnel, the City Water Tunnel number 1 access.
I'm not sure why the project would block access, right? The gates are flip-up gates. They'll only be deployed during a storm event. So, I mean, if you're talking about regular access to the site, I don't see why there would be any issues with that.
Great. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that site, unfortunately, to add anything more myself.
Yeah, I think the site is right at the corner of Clinton and South Street. So, I mean, the barriers underneath FDR. So South Street is still open to, for vehicles, right? So.
Got it.
And to be clear, that it falls on the dry side of the flood protection. So in the event of a storm, it would certainly be protected, and there would be, you'd be able to access it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have a few questions left, but I just want to remind folks of a couple things in case people need to start dropping off. So number 1, this presentation, both in PDF and in the recorded video in English, Spanish, Fujianese, Cantonese, and Mandarin, will all be posted on the website. I'm going to put the website in the chat right now, or actually I would ask a colleague of mine to do that if they don't mind. To put the website in the chat. Additionally, we are going to have the VR 360 views at 4 key locations along the Esplanade. Those are going to be available on the website as well, probably as soon as tomorrow or Friday. We have heard a few comments that it's sort of difficult to imagine exactly what this project looks like, even though we're seeing plans. So we've done our best to sort of create these 360 views where you can sort of stand as if you're inside the project and look around. And I hope that's helpful for folks in the room here. Lastly, I'm still going to take a few more questions, but before anybody starts to drop off, I do just want to say thank you to the elected officials whose staff joined, Community Board 3, the broader community, and all the other groups that we see represented here. This has been a long time coming, and we're glad to be getting towards final design with the project. And your cooperation and your feedback along the way has really been critical. So with that, I'm going to continue on. We have 4 or 5 more questions. So just going to finish that out. And again, if any of I see 2 people on the phone. There's 2 people on the phone. If you're interested in a question, you can press *9. So Virginia asked, I would like something similar in the East River Park area. Is that possible? So I think Jordan answered that earlier in terms of saying that the constructing a flood protection device beneath the FDR is sort of much more challenging and sort of a more difficult and constrained scenario than when you have the park space. So they're a little bit of apples and oranges to compare the two. But the ESCR project is using flip up and deployables in a few locations. Anna asked, what is the timeline in relation to the Montgomery to 23rd Street work? The ESCR project is on a separate timeline, but this project will begin in next year, late next year. And again, we'll be coordinating closely. DDC will be coordinating closely with the community. Let's see, there were a few comments I see from Christina, Trevor, and Ms. Torres about event space in passive areas. I think generally I know that Parks is here. Grace, I think, yeah, hey Grace. But generally, Parks will be maintaining and operating the amenities space on top of the flood protection device. So I would say generally it will be up to the Parks Department. But I would say generally as a project team, we are very interested in seeing this, seeing all of these great places activated and used to their potential. Grace, is there anything else you wanted to add on programming before I move to the next question?
Hi, yeah, so just to reiterate, yes, Parks is responsible for, maintaining the Esplanade as we do now. So we'll be one of the many agencies helping to maintain the space. Sorry, what was the original question? Is there a way to program the site beyond?
Yeah, it was, is there a way to bring amenities such as a farmer's market into the passive areas? Echoing the comment about art and culture opportunities and yeah.
Right, I think, and maybe EDC can remind me, I know EDC and Parks has an agreement right now for the Esplanade on sort of who does what. And as far as farmers markets, I'm not sure if it would be an arrangement with Parks or under EDC, but we certainly do farmers markets in our park spaces. So we can talk about that a little more offline, but we certainly have arrangements to do programming on park sites. And so this could be a candidate as well.
Great, thank you, Grace. And then another question from Grace Mack. Regarding construction, would you help measure or test the water in neighboring buildings because running water sometimes turns brown or muddy? I think anything, again, sort of, we do need to push questions on construction details to sort of a later date, unfortunately, since DDC will be constructing the project. But, again, I think it's important to us that while we are working on this project, that we are sort of respecting the community as neighbors and working with them on any concerns. Let's see. I believe that is all the questions we have. Is there anybody who has another question that we didn't get a chance to answer, or have we gotten to all of them? We were going a little bit out of order because there were the live and the chat questions. If not, I just want to thank everybody for their attendance this evening. Again, there's a lot of work from a lot of people that's gone into this project. We appreciate you all spending your evening with us. I hope everybody stays warm and safe and healthy, and just want to wish you happy holidays on behalf of our team. Thanks for joining us. And again, we're going to have a lot of materials posted on the website afterwards. Team, is there anything that I'm neglecting to mention? Oh, right, of course. So we'll leave this up for a few minutes after the presentation concludes. But if you're interested in continuing to hear more information about this project and getting direct invites from us for future events on this project, please go to the Eventbrite page, which is the first link you see on the page here. This Zoom was open to the public and everybody could join without registration. But if you're interested, registering will help us include you directly for future meetings. Frank. Hello.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. No, I just wanted to, I might have missed it, but I know that there was sort of follow-ups in terms of some of the questions that would be addressed. And I wondered, is there a commitment to understanding like when that follow-up will happen? And is this going to be a similar community style format? Or what do you, I just wondered what the envisionment was. And thank you again for this in and of itself. I think it's probably really useful and it reached a greater audience. So thank you.
Yeah. So the recordings will be posted online. We're going to do our best to make a transcript of each question that was asked and the answer that we gave to it. That should be online probably within the next couple of weeks, just as long as it takes us to sort of pull the files together and pull the Q&A together, understanding that the holidays are coming up. We'll continue to be updating Community Board 3 on this project, and then we will also plan to have another meeting of this sort of style, a large public meeting, probably in the springtime. So we'll be doing a similar, we'll be doing something similar in the spring, hopefully in person, but we'll see what happens. Great. I see Trevor.
Yes, not really a question, but just to thank you. I live in one of the buildings that was flooded during Hurricane Sandy, and our building was devastated. I'm the president of the Resident Association of 82 Rutgers, which is on the corner of Rutgers and South. We're the closest building to the water. So we experienced not only the storm, but we witnessed the water coming over the edge of the Esplanade on a regular basis. So we are really want to make sure, and I understand the funding issues of spending data, but we really want to make sure we get this project in place so that we don't have to ever go through what we experienced again. And I want to thank the team for also reaching out to the resident leaders along the waterfront, especially in the buildings that were flooded. It's actually a 0.82 mile long stretch, but there are quite a few residents who live along from Brooklyn Bridge to Montgomery. So I just want to thank the team.
Great. Thank you, Trevor. Thanks for joining us and for your help in getting the word out. And then Ms. Torres, looks like you have the last word. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you. But I do want to know if you're going to make presentations to the community board, that we be emailed or sent an invitation directly so that we know, especially when you're doing the presentations, because we're the ones that are living this. And I would hope that, we could be there when you do the presentation. So when we meet with you, it's not a surprise what was discussed in the meeting. And I do thank you, and I hope everybody has a blessed and happy holiday and stay safe. And this has been a good meeting. I haven't had to yell. And so I'm so happy. It's been a sad week. And I just wanted to do a footnote. I don't know for the people that are online, Roberto Napoleon, who was the president of Bellatrix Houses, passed on Sunday. And so he was a good leader, a mentor to me and to a lot of us. And so, with his passing, we lose somebody who had a lot of vision for the Lower East Side. And I just wanted to thank everybody for doing this presentation in the middle of a storm. Even though we're doing Zoom, it's still a storm outside. So thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, yes, want to echo that, appreciate everybody's commitment to the community here. It means a lot to us that so many people turned up for this meeting. We put a lot of work into it. And with that, we're gonna leave this page up for just a minute, but in case anybody needs to take down the information or the websites, this is where you can find out more information about the project. So I'll leave this up for a few minutes, but we're gonna say goodbye. So thank you again for your attendance and attention and thoughtful questions, and stay safe, happy holidays. We'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.